Today we're going to be talking about a kind of car that no matter what, you always end up turning your head for. A car that has made way more waves by being slow than being fast as f***. A quality of car that takes it back to the days of paint where you didn't need an ND filter to make the car look good. A car that you think to yourself, when you have a pole shed, you'll probably own one of them because you're just straight mobbing, all right? A car genre that properly came from North America and helped define international culture. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about you wanting to own a lowrider. The history of lowriders is diverse, and while we won't spend the whole time talking about it, we're gonna spend a couple 2-3 minutes on it because it's important, all right? It's like the Spark Notes, buckle up. The history of lowriders depends on where you look. Some old school lowriders and historians would say it actually started with the rise of the paseo, okay? A representation of nonconformity and rebelliousness of the Mexican-American community against the Anglo-nationalism at the time of the 30s and 40s. This was a big deal actually back then. Others state it started in the late 40s during the post-war prosperity of the 50s because America was rich from World War Dub, all right? Or at least far better off than most people. Others would say it was an involvement from the days of something called the Pachuco, where young men and women would gather in town centers to flirt and play around like young teenagers that didn't really know what was in their pants. Still happens, all right? The guys would actually dress themselves up to look a little bit classier than the rest, and the ideology followed into cars into Southern California, where the Mexican-American culture bloomed in the early 20th century. All different stories. Regardless of which start point to the story, one thing was clear. The dawn of the lowrider scene came from a culture that found a way to express themselves during a new period of culturalization. While the 20s, 30s, and 40s had lowriding culture, it was not as robust as what we now see it as, mostly because the culture was focused more about simply making things aftermarket versus low and slow. That was pretty much the way up until the 40s and into the 50s. The shift of the general automotive culture shifted away in the 50s and 60s from just looks into flamboyant bubble tops with technology and going fast as all hell. This energy is what would spawn the birth of drag racing, NASCAR, salt racing, and much more. But that's not where the whole scene went. A large portion of the community in East Los Angeles didn't do that. The Mexican-American culture of that area, or Chicanos, remained in that time honored technique of lowering and streamlining old cars, cutting springs and flipping frames that truly embody the statement of low and slow. It's more about the looks than anything else. The culture would continue down the path of creating cars that embodied just design, significance, and uniqueness that borrowed cues from the bright and crazy design work of history. Then something big came around, all right? Big old Johnny, and his name
was hydraulics.
It was like lowriders would evolve with the introduction of hydraulics, which helped against the growing police enforcement of not allowing modified cars to cruise or sit below the bottom of the rim back then. This was true, all right? They were picky. It got so bad that individuals protested the discrimination, particularly in Los Angeles, where police officers were commonly targeting those with lowered vehicles with violations and even jail time. The introduction of hydraulics allowed individuals to just press a button and boom! Ride height, baby. This allowed anyone to pass inspection, create a disgruntled police officer, and just kind of looked cool. The days of cutting springs and throwing sandbags in trunks was over, baby. Now, you could just leave. It was actually really sweet. It was the introduction of this lowered and raised system that birthed the now thing you would call hopping, where the car quite literally hops because of the hydraulic pressure exceeding the weight of the car, causing lift of the car. It's pretty sweet. And if you've seen it before, it is the tightest thing in the world. It's dope as f. The difference in the car scene was one of the first major shifts in the lowriders, shifting out of the typical car scene, and is considered by mostly everyone the first major fracture of car culture in America. The days of individuals like Ed Roth and Speed Rockets dominating the entire scene was over. The low and slow mentality caused an incredible amount of talk in Los Angeles, eventually referring to the new lowriding style as this, which means turning everything opposite in both meaning and function. Some even referenced hydraulics on lowriders. They called it like the politics of laughter because of what the car modification and style meant to the area and the people who owned it. It was a fun and exciting thing that you could do. The introductions of cars like the Chevrolet Impala in 1958 would further explode the lowrider movement, specifically because it featured an X-shaped frame, which would inevitably be paired with hydraulics, and it was perfect. It was like peanut butter and jelly. It was like ramen and tapatio. It was just Perfect, tortilla and cheese. The idea continued to grow in the 60s and 70s during the Chicano civil rights movement, which ended up gaining popularity in main media streams, news stations, music videos, media, and in general, pretty much everywhere. Films like Boulevard Nights would depict a controversial light on the unconformed connection between gang life and lowriders. Lowriders started getting involved in music videos, this, that, and the other thing. It was crazy the amount of attention that lowriders were starting to get, especially in mainstream media and particularly music. Whittier Boulevard would continue to see cruising regardless of police regulation as the lowriding scene adopted more ways to express themselves through airbrushing, crazy patterns, adapted frames, and fabric that would make anyone just wonder, how in the hell did they do that, dude? That doesn't make sense. If you want to jump up into a lowrider, there's one thing that you have to do though. The motors will hold, the cars are a banger, and if you can find one clean, you're gonna have a good time. Lowriders are more known for their paint, ride height, and slow style though than anything else. White walls, mesh wire wheels, and hydro are a must. Lowriding culture is about the car, sure, but it started as so much more. It started as an expression, a way for a culture to speak up and out about their heritage. It pivoted away from the main culture of race cars and was the first major splits in the automotive culture. It caused the entire domestic automotive industry to think twice about what it was doing and gave light to something that was just different. It evolved into hip-hop, Japanese car culture, and even more. And it's just satisfying. I'm Alex from Fitment Industries, and we will see you later. Peace.